to show something on the screen while we're getting started. So here we go. So hi, I'm Marty Groman, and the honor and pleasure of serving as Executive Director of E2Tech. You get that mute button, Francis. There you go. Yeah, this is a Zoom meeting, not a Zoom webinar. So we have it open, and it's meant to be kind of a discussion. The idea is that it would be something like the conversation you might get into at the end of or in the hall at an E2Tech forum. Wasn't that interesting? I agree with this. I disagree with that. I'm working on these things. So we'll have a presentation from our guest, Dr. David Reidmiller, and then we'll get into some Q&A. I have a couple of plant questions, but I'd rather not use them if you have questions. So I'm just running through some fun intro slides about E2Tech, and I'll go backwards and just point out that this 292 number here keeps going up. We'd love to have 300 members. These are members only events meant to be free, but certainly we don't want anything we do to be a barrier to participation. And share some stuff on social media if you would. One of the things that we do is make these all free for public officials. All of our events are free for mayors and city councilors and state legislators and things like that. And it's meant to, we don't lobby or advocate, but this is a way for us to inform, and that's really our mission. You'll notice that when you see sign-on letters and stuff like that, even though we're one of the state's biggest business associations, you don't see our name there. And so we try to stay as a sort of neutral policy roundtable. Committed to our work in diversity, equity, inclusion. A lot of that is around employment. We got a great jobs board. Actually, I know Whipley MacPage is posting some jobs. They're a member, I guess just now called Whipley, excuse me, posting some jobs literally today. So lots of good jobs getting posted within our sector. And let me see, we're blessed today to have Francis Twaku with us. Francis prepares this thing here every week, which is, as I mentioned, we don't lobby or advocate, but we do track. And this is a member benefit, which is a smidgen hidden within the website. And you do need to be logged in to see it. So if you have a hard time finding it, let me know. But we'd love for you to use that resource. Francis, do you want to just pop up on the screen briefly and introduce yourself?
Yes. So my name is Francis Twaku. I have a PhD in environmental studies from Antioch. I teach, research, and consult on environmental and energy policy, clean energy and natural resource management. I'm open to opportunities in these areas. Thank you.
Thanks, Francis. Yeah, so the joke here is that Francis is working for us, consulting essentially on a part-time basis, but we hope one of you will steal him from us as a capable engineer and manager and scientist. So we enjoy working with you, Francis, but if you land at an E2Tech member company, we certainly understand. So thank you. I'll just run through the remainder of my intro here. So yeah, grab those notes when you get the chance. Everything we do this year is supported by the Horizon Foundation. We're so pleased to be working with them and their team there and advancing Maine's clean energy economy. We also have been very involved with the Maine Technology Institute in reinvigorating the Energy and Environmental Tech Board. And that's been a very successful and invigorating project. If you or a friend has a startup idea or a business expansion idea relating to MTI, get in touch. We can help and help shepherd your proposal through the process. We're blessed to have Burns and Mac as our sustaining champion, makes everything we do possible all year, and Bernstein Sure, Power Market, and SMRT architects and engineers. And this amazing group here, I always like to leave this slide up a little bit longer. So many great companies involved here, including Pierce Atwood, and I think I see Sarah Tracy, and thank you for joining. Just a great group that makes our work possible all year long. And we're so blessed to have them working with us, and as well as our annual partners. All E2Tech members get a free subscription, print subscription to Maine Biz, and you'll get the occasional, very occasional email about how to do that. And then TRC and VHB support our work all year long. We've got some cool events coming up. Nature Like Fishways. This is an alternative to fish ladders. This is another one of these E2Tech Connects events. And native pollinators. World Bee Day is actually exactly 1 month from today, May 20th, and we've got put together a cool panel on that. It's an unusual topic, but it's very timely and tied into dual use solar and many other elements of the way we do business, including agriculture. And then there in the purple that we just added, clean tech investing in special purpose acquisition corporations. SPACs are in the news a lot. We have some real experts on SPACs, and you won't want to miss that one. It's going to be interesting. Comes from one of our program committee members, Chris Rauscher, who's putting that one together. I think it's going to be pretty cool. So this is a Zoom meeting. You may unmute at any time. It's meant to be an informal discussion. We are recording it, and please be ready with your questions, or I'll ask questions, and that's nowhere near as much fun. So enough out of me. Dave, we're so pleased to have you here. It's great to be working with GMRI, and we look forward to what you have to present for us today.
Thanks a lot, Marty. And to Sarah and Natalie, thanks for helping set this up. Appreciate everyone taking the time out of their midday to listen to what we've got going on at GMRI with the launch of our new climate center. So I am going to share my screen. Hopefully, can I just get a thumbs up from Marty if it looks good? Yep.
Yeah, sure.
All right, great. I came to GMRI over this past summer, middle of the pandemic, after about a decade of federal service, working in a variety of different science policy roles, focused on climate change at the State Department and the White House and so on. And over that time, I really became interested in thinking about how, rather than just kind of working on climate change issues at the federal and international level, which obviously was super rewarding, but also at the same time could almost feel somewhat detached, right? And I really wanted to see what my next career step could be in terms of affecting climate action on the ground at a more local level. And so when the opportunity arose to join GMRI, which I came to know through my leadership of the National Climate Assessment, where some of our scientists participated, I was just thrilled at the opportunity to not only move to Maine on a personal level, but also to really affect change at a local level as well. So with that, maybe I'm going to turn it over to our president and CEO, Don Perkins, who will kind of give a brief one-slide intro of what we as an organization do. He'll turn it back to me. I'll talk about the Climate Center for a few minutes, and then we'll end on another exciting new initiative we've recently started up. So with that, maybe I'll turn it over to Don. If you want to unmute yourself and go ahead.
Thank you, E2Tech, and thanks, Dave. I'm sorry, Dave, that I was causing you to wonder where I was. You'll all find it amusing that our septic system is being pumped as we speak, and I'm multitasking. So many of you know us, but we're an independent nonprofit research institute based here in Portland. We built our lab about 18 years ago now. At the time, we had 15 staff. Today, we have 75. We have an annual budget of about $13 million a year that we compete for in various science agencies and philanthropic environments around the country. We have 3 core competencies. The first is an interdisciplinary research team that's on the forefront of understanding the impact of climate change on our marine ecosystem, particularly our fishery ecosystem. Secondly, we have a science literacy initiative that sees about 70% of Maine's 5th and 6th grade students in our lab every year for extraordinary research in a working research lab. Doesn't matter whether the kids woke up in Presque Isle or York or Portland. It's free of charge, paid for by generous companies from around the region. And then third, we have a community team that works with fishing communities up and down the New England coast to assist them in transitioning to sustainable, catching fish sustainably and growing fish responsibly. So that's who we are. We created the Climate Center that Dave now runs in order to integrate our work across the whole organization to support communities as we wrestle with the challenges and occasionally opportunities of the climate crisis that we face. Dave?
Great, thanks, Don. So with that, I think a lot of this is probably familiar to many of you, but I think it's worth just a quick primer on the types of risks that climate change poses to life in and around the Gulf of Maine, whether it's some of the fastest warming waters in the world or rapid rates of acidification of our waters, sea level rise and stronger storms, or any number of other impacts that you can see here. There's a whole host of climate related threats to the ocean and the coastal zone in our region. And by extension, the people, businesses, and communities who rely on them for their livelihoods and well-being. And all of this really is going to inform our work going forward and thinking about how can we help those people, businesses, and communities respond to those risks. And as Don gave mention, to capitalize on some of those opportunities that might come from responding to those risks. So briefly, the framework for the Climate Center was really informed over the past, kind of my first 6 months on the job, really trying to understand not only what we as an organization have been doing and where our strengths are, but really going out and talking to scores of companies, academics, nonprofits, municipalities, and others to really understand what are the issues that they're grappling with when it comes to climate change on the coast and on the water. And it all kind of starts with a clear articulation of the problem. And that's really that climate change represents an existential threat to coastal communities as we know them. But one thing that's really important is that it doesn't have to. And that's really the outcome we want to realize, is that climate change in coastal communities can actually thrive in a warmer world if they're able to kind of capitalize and leverage the action that can be taken from the local to the global scale. And we're going to be instrumental in helping make that happen. And part of the way we're going to do that is by leveraging our existing capabilities. As Don mentioned, we have strong programmatic areas and relationships across the region in a number of domains, but the Climate Center in particular will be focusing on 4 existing core strengths of our organization. But also how communities are grappling with those changes associated with those stocks. The second is in seafood business innovation, thinking about the seafood supply chain as a whole and how we can help them kind of not only be resilient to climate change, but also to capitalize on new market opportunities that may arise as a result of climate change. The third is on responsible aquaculture development. Obviously, the cold, clean waters of Maine and the Gulf of Maine are a great location for aquaculture, and we see this as a real economic growth opportunity, but also importantly, a risk diversification strategy for fishermen who may be concerned with the impacts of climate change. And the fourth big existing strength that we're going to build on is in the domain of coastal community resilience. We have a really strong historical effort focused on building capacity and raising awareness in communities about vulnerabilities associated with sea level rise. And we're evolving that work into a much broader municipal climate action program that's going to be engaging deeply and intensively with towns up and down the coast that frankly don't have the capacity, the resources to do this kind of climate action planning and implementation that we hope to support. But in in doing some of this outreach over the past 6 months, there were a number of gaps that were realized as well. Other nonprofits are doing some really great work in this space, but the scale of this problem is enormous, right? As if you pay attention to the news, you get a sense of. And there were kind of 3 other growth areas that I felt us as an organization were well positioned to play a leading role in. And the first is in the climate policy domain. Again, thinking about the coastal and marine areas, and that climate policy space ranges from the local, where you're thinking about sort of zoning decisions and land use decisions, up through kind of a state, regional, national, and even international when it comes to kind of international fisheries work and that sort of thing. The second big new area that we're going to be branching out into is in the realm of climate mitigation, specifically thinking about how can we lower the carbon footprint of economic activity in the region. And that looks like traditional decarbonization efforts, whether it's looking at the waterfront economies and ways we can electrify them, or other things like that. But there's also, kind of these novel carbon dioxide removal approaches. And you've probably seen some of this in the news, whether it's like kelp farming and other kind of natural solutions to kind of sequester carbon that's already in the atmosphere that contributes to warming. And thinking about some of frankly, the technical and governance issues that arise as we kind of look to accelerate some of those to a much larger scale. And then the third and final big area that we're going to grow some expertise in is in the realm of climate finance. And this is critically important, particularly as in thinking about supporting these smaller towns and municipalities as they look to build resilient infrastructure, and matching them with the resources that they're going to need to make these action plans a reality on the ground. But it goes beyond just that kind of financial resourcing piece to thinking about different types of financial tools and instruments that we could help develop to address some of the emerging risks that small businesses and communities face, whether it's optimizing incentive structures for different types of marine uses, or risk diversification tools for small scale aquaculturists to make sure that they're not reliant on a single cove that may experience a harmful algal bloom, for example, things of that nature. And all of this can only be realized if we sustain engagement with stakeholders throughout the process. And that extends from the vessel level fishermen all the way through to our elected leaders. And so you might ask yourself, what does a thriving coastal community look like in a warmer world? Well, the good news is that we already have some good practices in place, in particular with our sustainable fisheries. I'm not sure if any of you saw it, but on Sunday, one of our own scientists, Kathy Mills, was featured on Today, where they talked about, frankly, the impact of climate change on the lobster fishery and some of the sustainable practices that have been in place, frankly, through self-regulation of that industry to really ensure that economic engine is going to thrive for decades to come. But beyond sustainable fisheries, we're thinking about resilient infrastructure on waterfront economies, thinking about healthy coastal zones and diversified economies. And really, as we get into these latter three too, thinking more broadly about what the communities are going to look like. We want to make sure that people are informed and understand what climate change means to them and how it's going to affect their lives and livelihoods and well-being and the things they enjoy doing. But also to ensure that the processes by which options are developed and the way in which solutions are implemented make equitable and just communities a reality and not just something that we hope to achieve. And through all this, we hope to, really get that renewed sense of place and cultural identity that has been so important to life on the waters of the Gulf of Maine for centuries now. So what this is going to look like in practice is that we envision ourselves as being end-to-end service providers of climate solutions. And what I mean by that is by investing in our fundamental science capabilities. So really, continuing to do that world-class scientific research that we've been doing for a couple of decades now, and taking that all the way down into on the ground action and implementation. And we really make this happen by having that sustained engagement with our stakeholders. So we really co-develop solutions that are customized for particular cases, particular sites, particular communities. And from kind of a content standpoint, the way we're going to address this is by having, you know, in-house technical experts, whether those are our climate modelers looking at high resolution sea level rise, or folks who can really quantify the different types of emissions across the seafood supply chain to identify opportunities to decarbonize while ensuring economic growth opportunities. And taking that technical information and handing that off to our Municipal Climate Action Program Manager and our emerging Corporate Climate Action Program Manager. And so these folks can go and engage with these stakeholders, relay to them the kind of information that we're discovering, and get a more nuanced understanding of the issues they're grappling with. We could take that more informed kind of challenge articulation back in-house to really, like I said, co-develop these customized adaptation and mitigation options that can then be realized through the unleashing of financing or other types of resources to, again, make sure that these options and plans become a reality on the ground, because that's the business we want to be in. So I'm going to pivot now, you know, after talking about a little bit about what the Climate Center is doing, to zooming out at the federal level, in part because of my work on the Biden-Harris presidential transition. I thought it would be useful to kind of put this in the broader federal context we're operating in. Obviously, over the past, you know, 6, 8, 10 years, we've undergone a pretty strong pendulum swing of climate being a priority at the federal level. And it's no secret that the Biden administration is certainly making climate change and ambitious climate action one of its top 4 priorities, along with economic recovery, emerging from the COVID pandemic, and addressing systemic racial inequality. And so on the climate front, you know, there's been a number of discrete climate actions that President Biden has taken, including through a number of day one executive orders that he promulgated, to a number of other commitments that he and his administration have really kind of committed to, frankly, from the campaign and into the administration. And a number of those are realized in the president's budget request that was released, at least in its initial form, just a week or two ago. And it's kind of an important time to be given this talk, because just this week, right, the Biden administration is hosting a Climate Leaders Summit tomorrow and Thursday that's really intended to catalyze a lot of international climate action, and to really think about, as the US unveils its 2030 commitment under the Paris Agreement, and thinking about how we can really motivate other major emitters to similarly make ambitious commitments to make sure that we can avoid the worst impacts of climate change. But we can zoom in a bit and think about climate action at the municipal level as well, right? And I skipped over the state level, and I don't want to give disjustice to what's been going on at the state, because we've seen an enormous amount of work through the Maine Climate Council and the 4-year action plan, Maine Won't Wait. But I did want to just kind of hit on the municipal climate action, because it relates specifically to a program that we have at within the Climate Center. And for those that aren't aware, the cities of Portland and South Portland released a joint climate action plan called One Climate Future back in December. And I believe this is probably the first in the nation kind of joint 2-city municipal climate action plan. And it was a multi-year process that started with sort of a baseline understanding of where our greenhouse gas emissions coming from. And so you can dig into that report and see what that looks like. And then pivoting to kind of the next common step in climate action planning of doing a vulnerability assessment to understand, okay, what critical infrastructure is at risk from climate change? What other drivers of our regional economy and community well-being are at risk from climate change? And all of that kind of bubbles up into a holistic climate action plan that they've called One Climate Future, that they've sort of distilled into these 6 big moves, thinking about, as we move forward, whether it's through a comprehensive planning process or other endeavors, how can we make sure that we are addressing climate change across all aspects of society? And so from an institutional standpoint, we've been doing a lot of this work, as I mentioned, for several years now through our coastal resilience program, thinking about raising awareness to different climate hazards. Here on the left, you can see what's called an Esri story map, where you can really investigate what different levels of sea level rise might mean for different communities throughout the coast. And you can zoom in and really kind of look at, frankly, the street level and even the facility level to see different levels of sea level rise and what that might mean, which helps the community make informed decisions about how they might address different scenarios. And it's all a matter of what that community's risk tolerance threshold is. And so you can really kind of optimize some of these levers in the policymaking process to think about, what is an acceptable level of risk and what is the economic trade-off with that level of risk. And so we're doing a lot of that work, a lot of capacity building to use these types of tools and information, but also, really engaging communities in kind of citizen science and getting folks, the general public involved in understanding where sea level rise, for example, is affecting their communities. And you can see here, kind of a king tide event in South Portland and what that looks like. I'm sure many of you that live in the coastal zone have seen things like this, not infrequently and increasingly so. But one other area that we're going to be branching out into is kind of the counterpart to that municipal climate action area, and that's really the corporate climate action area. And this is something that I hope is resonant with many of the folks in the call here, because we're really trying to kind of capitalize on the momentum that is really building within the private sector to take ambitious climate action. And we see our role in this as being kind of twofold in terms of where we focus our corporate climate action program. The first is in the seafood supply chain, where we historically have a number of very strong relationships and, frankly, good institutional understanding of how that industry works. But also, as really the kind of main climate enterprise on the Portland waterfront, we think not only do we have an opportunity, but I would argue we have a responsibility to try and convene and catalyze climate action among corporate actors in the greater Portland region. And you can see here what we're really going to try and do is advance the understanding of climate risks and options for action among these organizations, to co-develop, as I mentioned, different types of solutions, to support the implementation, and also to kind of provide that third-party kind of validation and promotion of kind of communal ambition. And so some of you hopefully will see this and see yourselves and your organizations in this effort. And if you are, please do follow up with me afterwards. I would love to kind of talk to you about how, as we get this off the ground. So with that, maybe I'll turn it back over to Don to talk about an exciting other initiative that we're recently launched.
Thanks, Dave. And when we were discussing this session with you all, Marty and Sarah had questions about our new ventures effort, which is, I'm just going to give a kind of a quick introduction to, and then we'll wrap up. So we have these core capabilities in the science, the education, the seafood supply chain, the coastal communities, and now you see in Dave this combination of national and international policy expertise brought local to knit our efforts together and have impact kind of at the community scale here along the coast of Maine. Another effort which is kind of similar to our climate change effort, to draw our know-how across the organization and support the development of know-how outside the organization, is a new business development effort where we basically define 3 bodies of work. The first is to support the creation of new businesses and the kind of at the intersection of sustainable seafood and climate. The broad moniker is the blue economy. So that slice of the blue economy. We ourselves have spun off 2 for-profit subsidiaries in the last 2 years. One, Gulf of Maine Sashimi, where you've probably bought their fish. The second, New England Marine Monitoring, which is replacing human observers with video cameras on fishing vessels. And we're now actively involved with several startup concepts outside of GMRI, assisting those external entrepreneurs developing their ideas into businesses. The second phase of our work will be to attract and support early stage or seed stage companies that got started up through someone else's efforts, but are ready to grow and looking for the combination of kind of coaching and technical support combined with investment. Again, at this intersection of seafood innovation and climate change in the broader blue economy. And then last but not least, to facilitate investment in these businesses. As many of you know, there are investors who are keenly interested in the idea of the blue economy, or in the idea of aquaculture, and the idea of innovation in seafood. But oftentimes they don't know how to connect with the entrepreneurs or how to make their way through all the risks of regulation, now the risks of climate change, the risks of politics. The flip side is that there are a lot of hardworking entrepreneurs who, many of them in our world, who came out of the science arena, who just don't know how to go looking for investment. So we see ourselves playing a key role facilitating investment from both directions. Dave?
Thanks, Don. So with that, we'll put our contact information up there should you want to reach out, and happy to open it up to any questions, comments, ideas. And thanks again for the time, everyone.
Yeah, thank you. Great presentation. Yeah, you can pop that share down, and that was really good. So I'm aware that I previously sounded like I was underwater, which is appropriate. I've switched my headset. Hopefully I sound a little bit better. So one of the ways that I like to queue up the involvement portion of this is by doing a smiling screenshot, by which I force you all to smile. So if you would be willing to do that, to turn your camera on for a second and give me a nice smile, I'll grab that, and we'll pop it on the E2Tech Facebook page. And then it kind of gets you in the habit of being on screen and being involved. There's something about smiling too, right? So, and then we will open it up for questions. And as I said, the goal is that none of them come from me, although I do have some good ones. So, all right, let me grab that screenshot. 1, 2, 3, smile, damn it. All right, great job. I gotcha. Okay. Would anyone like to start off? I mean, there was a ton there. You've got I'm so interested in the sort of innovation piece, the clean tech stuff, what you're doing there. I know you have a bunch of different initiatives, including some recent support from the EDA, but who can I pick on? Who's feeling like they have a question to start us off?
Hey, Marty, I'll start.
Thank you, John.
Just two things. One is that Gulf of Maine sashimi. That is the best fish I've ever had. You know, and I mean, we go to. I love the fish stores in town, Tiny Big Man's, but that's the best fish. It is stunning how different it tastes. So kudos there. But I guess a question I had was around your role. I know it's an ambitious agenda, but what amount of advocacy are you thinking of engaging in? Because, you know, obviously policy is so often driven by ideology and political perspectives. And I know, Don, that I think you've always tried to sort of maintain a respectful distance between research and advocacy. But it just feels like so much of public policy is driven not by real research and knowledge, but perspective. And it would be great, I'll just say it, it would be great if you were going to engage, and especially at the state level. So that's just somewhere between a question and a request. How's that?
Dave, should I take this, just given the history?
You can start. Yeah, sure. Go right ahead. Yeah.
So as John knows, as Daniel knows, and probably many of the others of you, historically, we set ourselves up as a kind of a neutral, nonpartisan entity. Because as we all know, there's plenty of noise and advocacy at both ends of the spectrum, and ultimately solutions get crafted, by integrating those diverse points of view. And we were quite novel 20 years ago when we did that, and we were also a new organization. 4 years ago, and around our strategic planning, we talked with 50 outside people who had watched us over the years, including some very active climate philanthropists, and including some former chief of staffs of various governors and senators and whatnot. And they basically went right where you went, John. They said, look, we understand why you were, kind of played this neutral role for years, but now that you're up and established, and that you really do have a unique expertise in the climate change arena, in the fishery arena, in the aquaculture arena, you need to step out from behind that neutrality and share that expertise and lean forward. And as you can imagine, that was a serious question for us. We grappled with it. The staff and our staff on the front lines of our work are the ones who had the hardest time making that transition. Our board got it, our management got it, but our staff were out there in the middle of the fray. This was a big shift. We made that shift, and we are now, we're now leaning in on policy issues where we have expertise. As an example, we filed for intervener status around the Nordic Aquafarms project in Belfast. As you can imagine, that was a challenging decision for us to make, but we did it because we happened to have expertise that was relevant, and viewed that particular regulatory action as the one that would set the regulatory standard for development of recirculating aquaculture here in the state over the next decade. We won't do that for the next recirculating aquaculture project, because we're not there to do this project by project. That was really a set the best practice standard. So you will see us showing up where we have unique expertise. You'll see us stand down from issues that might be of interest to us, but where our science and community insight aren't really germane. And so, did I get to your question, John? Great. Dave, you may want to follow on.
Daniel, question or follow on thought? Oh, Dave, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think Don captured it well. Thanks.
Okay. Keep them coming. Go ahead, Daniel.
Thank you, Dave. And I should say I'm a former board member of GMRI and a current supporter. So thank you for everything you all are doing. My question is about the state climate plan and the work that's going on at the state level. I'm just wondering if you've thought about how that might support what you're doing at the local level. And to be honest, I haven't really thought about it myself, but I was just wondering what your thoughts about that are.
We've thought about it quite a bit, actually. We were fortunate to have an intern, a Jan Plan intern, come to us over this past winter to map a lot of our existing coursework onto all the strategies and goals that are laid out within the Maine Won't Wait Climate Action Plan. So we have kind of a mapping exercise done of where our work kind of fits onto I should clarify, our existing work maps onto the state climate action plan. There's a number of areas in there that are obviously right in our wheelhouse, particularly the things that came out of, say, the Coastal and Marine Working Group. There are other areas, obviously, like the Natural and Working Lands Working Group that we are keenly interested in. But again, as Don said, that's not really our wheelhouse and probably won't be playing too much in that space. And so just as one example, the state's climate action plan calls for the establishment of a seafood business coalition to be led by the Department of Marine Resources. And as you can see, obviously, our corporate climate action program could be keenly aligned with exactly that coalition. And so we've been in conversation with the governor's office to think about how can we make sure that we are being additive here and really taking on any support that they may need, because to be perfectly honest, it's a remarkably ambitious plan. And I think the state realizes that they certainly can't take it all on themselves. And we are in the fortunate position of having the expertise and the bandwidth to kind of step in and really play a leadership role in taking on board some of those recommendations.
That's great. Who may I pick on next? I'm sort of famous for just calling out names and trying to, Sarah.
Thanks for your talk today. It's pretty cool to hear what you're doing and where you're going. I was sort of interested in the financing side of it, having been involved in local government, dealing with climate change issues and preparation for sort of adaptation strategies. It always seems to boil down to money oftentimes. And also I know that I sort of saw from Don's part of the presentation, when you're looking at supporting businesses, obviously that there's a sort of a financing piece to that too. And I was curious where you see your sources of money coming from, or what, sort of how you envision getting money to these efforts, because we can all talk about how great it would be, but at the end of the day, somebody's got to pay for it.
Sure. Yeah. So I think, just to be clear, we're talking not about GMRI's operations and things like that. We're talking about how do we match financing to kind of projects, right?
Yeah, the projects that you identify as a result of your efforts and your stakeholders and your project.
Yeah. And, a lot of this comes, there's a matchmaking component, which means, understanding where different pots of money lie and what are the stipulations that go with them. Whether that is navigating the federal program space. But there's also an enormous kind of private sector financing, financial realm, right? That has innovative financing models that can really internalize and monetize some of these externalities that historically haven't been priced into how you can frankly finance some of these large scale infrastructure projects, whether it's wastewater treatment or stormwater drainage, that sort of thing. And so we've got some partnerships with organizations that do exactly that kind of work. And we're looking to bring that expertise to bear and to make those connections to these municipalities as we get in and work with them to identify, the roads that need to be raised, the culverts that need to be expanded, all those sorts of things to make sure that access to services, whether it's hospitals or elder care facilities or wherever else, can continue despite the increased risk from climate change.
And I would just hop on the tail of that to say that, here, depending on where you live, I don't know what community you've been active in, Sarah, but, the communities here in Greater Portland all have professional staffs. They're under huge demands. And, as you well know, and as many people in this call know, even in the communities that are, well resourced here, we all struggle with meeting the array of needs. But, you get outside of Greater Portland in more isolated communities, and the scale of the problems is much smaller. Oftentimes you have no professional staff or part-time professional staff, and so bundling several communities together to go to work with our delegation and provide the sustained pursuit of funding. It might be federal funding, it might be some kind of creative municipal bond tool, it might be philanthropic or foundation funding. But once you get outside the larger towns here, particularly along the coast, a little bit of money goes a long way. But these communities just don't have the staff resources to make it happen.
Agreed, they don't.
This is really great.
Sarah, which town are you in?
Well, I just stepped off the Freeport Town Council after 7 years and chairing it for 3, and it was a topic of much conversation. But I will say, aside from a few bridges which are now underway, and that's great, and we're contributing to that to make it more sustainable than even MDOT would plan for. It has been hard to get these projects moving forward. Financing is just an issue.
I was going to say, Dawn, I thought you'd never ask. But back when we met in person, it seemed like our program committee chair, Sarah, would often suggest Freeport for events. I don't know how this happened. It's a wonderful place. Thank you for doing so much for the town. Who's Christine? Anything on your mind that came up in the presentation?
So many things, actually. So I'm actually from California and was a manager of 2 local government partnerships that work with the local government commission when California was doing all of their action plans with cities and towns. And one of the things that strikes me in this conversation with the funding, there's 2 things actually. One, they tried to standardize that process, the climate action process, as much as possible so that you could work with multiple towns at one time, and in doing their greenhouse gas emission inventories as well. But what happened at the end of the day is, through grant funding and support from the local utilities and everything else, they managed to get the climate action planning done, but then there was no funding for any of that work. And so what I also managed a large economic strategy project with, many, many stakeholders. And what I think I would caution is to try and align any of your mitigation strategies, anything you're trying to do with grassroots effort, from the ground up. We see all of these policy changes, it's all from the top down. But when it comes to actual implementation and making those things happen and, and garnering that private funding, you have to align yourself with the things that they're actually trying to achieve in their communities, that align with your mitigation strategy. So that's just one thing, to make sure that you're working from the ground up. And then, the other thing with the infrastructure, thank goodness, Biden is prioritizing that funding. So, that's going to be very helpful. But the other thing is, one of the projects we worked on was an integrated infrastructure committee, because what you find is the towns and the Maine DOT, you have priorities, how they fund those projects, but it doesn't necessarily align with what private industry is trying to develop. There's certain areas where there's developers that have projects that they want to do that is not necessarily aligned with the priorities of the infrastructure development. And so, starting that conversation so that you can make the most of the private development that's going to be making those investments. So that was really my one question is, what is being done on a grassroots level to make sure that these policy changes, are really aligning with what's happening in those communities?
You're into the Q&A section already.
Yeah, Christine, it's a great observation, and I think your experience from California is particularly instructive. Obviously, California and New York and some of the other kind of forward-leaning states when it comes to climate action have a lot of history here and a lot of experience that, frankly, I think we can draw on. And I like to think that having sat at kind of the federal level and observed a lot of this bubble up into, say, the National Climate Assessment, we can kind of pull some of the best practices here into the state of Maine. And I think one of the most important pieces of this was kind of implicit in some of what I said, but you really hit it home, is ensuring that the processes by which these options and solutions are developed are transparent and inclusive. And doing so from the start, I think, is incredibly important. Each community is going to have different types of decision-making processes, and we need to be in the business of understanding how decisions are made in different types of contexts. Because as I mentioned, risk tolerances are going to vary, in case by case, community by community, and the values are going to to differ community by community, and we need to, you know, approach all of these with humility and ensure that, you know, from the bottom up, we're talking to the community leaders themselves to understand what the values are, what the biggest challenges are, what the barriers are, and where they think some opportunities may lie. So, you know, I'm still, you know, I think it's, as far as specific grassroots efforts, I think I might put a pin in that and say, you know, let me kind of come back to it on a case-by-case basis as we get into these different circumstances, because again, I think it's got to be site-specific when you're talking about adaptation actions in particular. So, but just making sure that
one of the other things we did, we were one of the first communities that actually did a climate adaptation strategy and had meetings with different stakeholders, like the emergency services people, and then with the business community and with the, you know, local governments and things like that. And one thing that we did, you know, when we went to the end of the day and looked at all the impacts and what all the money was going to be required, you know, it was clear some communities are going to be hit hard and they're going to be eligible for the grant funding, for emergency funding, things like that. Some of the smaller communities, they're going to have just as many needs, but they're not going to be as eligible for those funding. And so, you know, that's where you want to really look to private industry, to other options to having those needs met.
Yeah, great point.
Yeah, that's such a challenge. And then we've got all this federal opportunity ahead of us too, that I think most of us here are probably working to sort out as well. You guys are doing, I feel like you're leading in this area, Dave and Don. It's a really good discussion. Is there anyone else who wants to jump in? Maybe Lori or Steve or Kelly? Okay, I have a question. So you know me, I'm kind of a startup guy, very, very interested in your venture work. So, and maybe this is, I don't know if this is a Don question, but we'll try that. So is there opportunities? If I'm an investor in this blue economy, I have money to deploy. Is there something that's happening sort of a shift wise because of climate or, you know, warming waters or things like that, that you're kind of identifying, that you're able to go out there and make a pitch and say, this is a good thing, you know, you're going to get your proverbial 10x return or whatever it is?
You know, the short answer, Marty, is yes. And there is, and it's a function of several trends. One is, you know, we have a growing human population, and feeding the world is not, you know, we take it for granted here because of the quality of our food supply. But seafood, you know, both sustainable wild seafood and increasingly aquaculture are going to be an essential source of protein in the 21st century. And if you just look at aquaculture investment happening here in Maine or around the world, that's one trend which the U.S. has been late to come to, because we're not a fishing nation, unlike Iceland or Norway or Scotland or Chile or New Zealand. But aquaculture is starting to become an opportunity in many ways here. Secondly, the combination of climate change and the acceleration of data science and you know, big data techniques, machine learning techniques. You know, climate change is a data-rich phenomena, and you know, the Rue Institute, you know, showing up here in Portland is a significant magnet, obviously, and we're seeing an increasing number of business concepts, both internally from staff and externally from other entrepreneurs, and we think that area is ripe. And then third, there is a, you know, it's about geography. So if we narrow the discussion to Portland or Maine, it's small. If we broaden it to Maine to Boston, it gets bigger. if we broaden it from Rhode Island to Iceland, all of a sudden there's more deal flow than the money that you and I are thinking about has appetite for. So there's a combination of trends and geography, and this EDA grant that you referenced earlier is funding us and a blue economy kind of platform in Boston called See Ahead to really go to work on establishing Maine as a source of insight and production capacity, Boston as a source of investment, and putting the two together. And we're very excited about it.
That is exciting. So a note in the chat there from Dave. Christine, I want to thank you for that really good question, by the way, and it gives me a chance to mention that we did have the climate directors give a presentation just like this back in February, I believe it was, and we have a recording of that, which we're happy to share with E2Tech members for the Portland, South Portland One Climate Future, which I think is the kind of cooperation that you're talking about. But let me go back to Dave, because I just want to give Dave the floor for a closing statement. This is Earth Week, this is Climate Week, there's tons of stuff coming out. You have this unique expertise. Close us out with what's ahead.
Sure, thanks. So two things I'll say. The first is that this is a big week, right? I mean, I think we as a nation are kind of back on the world stage when it comes to climate leadership, and I think you're going to see that on full display as Biden virtually convenes his counterparts from major emitting nations over the coming days, and I suspect you'll see kind of a rollout of a number of climate announcements from other countries, but also from probably some philanthropists domestically, and also in particular from the corporate sector. I would expect to see some things rolling out over this week. So it's an exciting week to pay attention to, and it's all going to culminate in part, with our new 2030 target for the Paris Agreement, which again will send a very strong signal to the entire economy and frankly the entire world about the direction we're heading in. And I guess on a related note, but at a much more kind of parochial and personal level, a lot of times people kind of feel paralyzed by the climate challenge and unsure what they can do to actually help with it. And one thing that's kind of emerged a lot more, especially among climate scientists, and if you go to kind of the Yale Climate Communication Program or the Center for Climate Communication down at George Mason, one thing you'll see is this constant theme of just getting out and talking about it. I think for a long time, people and continued Americans still don't see climate change as affecting them personally. They think it affects future generations. They think it affects plants and animals, and it affects people overseas, but they don't necessarily see how it affects them personally. And I think the more we can mainstream climate considerations in our daily conversations and in our daily work, it's going to become, undeniable that we need to take ambitious action. And I think, we're starting to see that momentum shift a bit more. And I think the extent to which we can leverage the opportunity of Earth data to really move that ball forward, we should capitalize on it. So big thanks to Marty, Sarah, again, Adelaide, everyone else for joining. It's been a real pleasure. Again, you have my contact info, so feel free to reach out anytime if you want to talk anymore.
Thank you. We'll definitely see you out on the water. Thanks to Burns and Mac, Bernstein, Sure, Power Market, this amazing group, and don't forget this. We got a lot of cool stuff coming up, and your ideas too. We are a community to present your ideas, and that's what we do. So this is recording. You'll get a recording of this. Thanks for participating. Thanks again to Don and Dave for a wonderful presentation. Enjoy the beautiful afternoon, and we shall see you soon at the next E2Tech event, which is on nature-like fishways. All right. Cheers.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Don.
Hello.
Thank you, Dave.